are adapting and evolving to climate change. Welcome, everyone, and also welcome to our virtual viewers. I'd like to introduce our next event, Moving Mountains Together, Youth Climate Action and the Sustainable Mountain Development, which is organized by ICIMOD. So I'll pass on the mic to Udayan.
Hello. Thank you, everyone. Hi. Thank you all for joining this event. So this event would be particularly focused on discussing around the needs for more youth engagement, mostly around the mountain issues. So as today's world is a home to largest generation of young people in the history. So we have around 1.8 billion people who are youth and who are below the age between ages of 10 and 24 years. And if we talk about the context in the HKH region, uh, the young people aged 13 to 35 years make up more than one third of the total population of the HKH region. But yet, the youth in the mountains have poor access to knowledge and opportunities, which is very evident to all of us. So this at this youth focused event today, we'll be discussing more about the need for more youth engagement in the climate action, and particularly for promoting the mountain agenda and the mountain issues. And over the last 2 days, we've listened to the experts talk about the need for more attention for the mountains, right? Because our glaciers are melting, and the people living in the downstreams are suffering because of the impact caused by those. So we'll be discussing here more about hearing the perspectives from the youth. But before that, just to set the scene before we go into the panel discussion, I'd like to invite a few colleagues here uh, to set the tone. But before that, because I think there are some new colleagues who have joined this event today, I'd just like to request my colleagues to run a quick small video, which we call HKH calling. So HKH is the range of the mountain, Hindu Kush Himalaya. So there's a video that gives a calling to all of the people to listen to the voices of the mountain. So if I can request my colleagues to start sharing the video.
Oh, there's silver beards shining in the sun as their eyes open. Amber lakes, shimmering jade, branching up, flowing down to the rivers we know best, to the shores of ancient lands, painting rainbows on sand. Oh, come take our hands, we'll show you a wonderland, cradle of culture and art, Hindu Kush Himalaya. The home to millions of people of many nations. But the sky is no longer blue, pollution turned gray. Floods and droughts and climate change, it's catching up, no time to waste. Oh, let's join our hearts, the future depends on us. There's no more time to wait, we should protect our land. Oh, come take our hands, we'll show you a wonderland. Cradle of culture and arts, Hindu Kush Himalaya. Home to millions of people of many nations and tribes. The vibrant pulse of the planet, the source of endless life. Oh, come take our hands, we'll show you a wonderland. Cradle of culture and arts, Hindu Kush Himalaya.
Okay, thank you for your attention. I hope you like the music video, and I hope you've heard the calling from the HKH. So, with that note, I'll now like to request Mr. Abraham Burgre from Ghana. Maybe just quickly I'll introduce him, and then I'll invite him to speak. So, he's a climate change consultant and researcher. He's also a PhD student at the University of Regina, exploring the subject of female smallholder farmers and their responses to climate change in Ghana. His areas of interest are nature, nature-based solutions, and disaster risk reduction. He is the contact point for Yongo's nature working group, the AYM for COP campaign, and the Youth Resilience Lab. The reason we have invited him to speak here is because he's representing the Yongo, the UNFCCC youth constituency, and he's been part of the conference of the youth that happened, just before the UNFCCC COP started. So we wanted to hear from his sort of experience being part of that process and some of the learnings that he would want to share with other youth fellows of this group. So may I invite Mr. Abraham for his keynote speech?
Thank you so much, and thank you so much, and thank you for everyone that is here in the session. Indeed, the youth are the future of the world. This is a statement that is so true, yet has been so polarized. And a lot of world leaders have used the statement in a way that has tokenized young people for a very long time. In fact, it's been said in a way that makes us feel powerful, yet less powering. And that remains the key issue, that when we talk about young people's involvement in climate action and in nature conservation, has been the case. As part of the UNFCCC constituency, which he rightly said, which is Yongo, we have fought over the years to overcome this tokenism that mainly young people have been subjected to. So words like young people are the future don't really tingle us again, because we know we are actually the future. And we want to take control of it. We are demanding and holding our world leaders accountable for actions and inactions that jeopardize our future. A future where our nature and ecosystems are preserved. A future where the pulse of the earth is still beating at a normal rate to ensure that our lives are preserved. And as the nature contact point for Yongo, I've had the opportunity to interact with young people who are working on various actions across the world, and those who are also interested in the mountain areas. And last year, I had the chance of being at the UNDRR GP event, where I met a lot of young people working within the HKH region and their interests in the mountains. And I must admit that although I knew a little bit about it by reading in books, it was really touching speaking to them, sharing with them, and learning from them the real issues within the region and how the region plays a key role in sustaining the Earth's systems. And this, interactions led to a lot of conversations, even where we started an initiative where we call the Youth Resilience Lab, which is bringing together young people working on disaster risk reduction, nature, and climate change together in one space. And I remember after that sharing with other colleagues in the Convention for Biodiversity Conference, where they are going to be having a conference in Montreal, CBD COP 20, CBD COP 15. And we were talking about this, and they were saying, well, it looks like, yes, we still even haven't explored so much about youth engagement in the HKH region, even in terms of biodiversity. And this translates to this year's Conference of Youth, the COI 17, which was had here in Egypt, which is the precursor youth event before COP. And in our global youth statement, we called for greater support, greater collaboration among young people working within different sectors that have to do with the environment and climate change, and calling for meaningful youth engagement to address this climate crisis together. Not just as helpless young people, but young people that know what we are doing and know that we have the ability to cause change. And that's what excites me about today and this session. And I want to applaud Easy Mode for that, because this session doesn't just bring old people to tell young people what our problems are and how we should deal with a problem, but it is inviting young people to share their experience and talk about the change that they want to see. And I believe that these young leaders are actually the future. This is not a tokenizing statement. This is a statement that is going to be expressed here today. And that is what excites me. And that is what we have been pushing in Youngo and throughout our discussions as young people within this conference. We want to be at the table. We want to contribute to the action. And so this is a way that we can move the mountains together. And I'm looking forward to the discussions that will be coming forward and seeing how young people within the HKH region want to share with us and want to provide a vision that we can work together. Thank you.
Uh, Thank you, Abraham. Thank you very much for being with us today, and also sharing from your experience attending in the conference of the youth, and bringing some of the messages from there. And you rightly stated that youth are not helpless, right? They are the power of the generation, and I think there's a demand that all of the youth would want to put in the world for them to be heard more constructively. So thank you for sharing your observations with us, and thank you very much also for being here with us, in spite of us inviting you at the very last minute. But we're glad that you could make it. So now I'd like to go next and invite. Maybe before I invite, I'll introduce the organization that is working. Which is called the People in Need, and we have Mr. Jan Markvika from the People in Need. He's the Relief and Development Department. So I think you have a presentation, short presentation, right? So may I request my colleagues to share the presentation? I request Jan to make his statement. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for great speech. I will not talk that much about these ideas which are behind why we are here together, but I will try to share with you what we can practically do. I work for People in Need as a director of Relief and Development Department. We started to work in Nepal in 2015 after the earthquake. We work on humanitarian assistance, but later on we started to help people rebuild affected areas. We work on the earthquake resilient housing, inclusive housing. But this took us to the like a bigger picture, which is obviously related to the climate change. So I will very briefly introduce you our project idea, or is already like a work in progress, something what we can practically do, and to show like what is the link with this like a big discussions in the big forums which are about the money, because what we need the solutions and we need money to implement it. I have only 5 minutes, so I will just ask you to go quickly through the presentation, and I will try to comment on slide, or if you can give it to me directly, I will do that. Great. Yeah, we don't have to discuss that much. Nepal is a young country. We have a very young team there, and this project is about technology, about science, about local governance, and all these three spheres are dominated by young people. So this is as well like a link to the main topic of this discussion. From this slide, I will just pick up the last thing, and actually this is the core explanation what we are talking about. We talk about so-called climate change toy model, and the idea is to bring science in the user-friendly way, in the user-friendly form to the local people, to the local communities, to the local governments, to inform their decisions about the development. So the idea is simple like that, and as well from the other direction, to bring to the scientific organizations and to the higher level of the government opinions, views of the local people living in these areas affected or being affected by the earthquakes. This is just where we are starting to work. Project is now in like a first phase of the assessments and launching up. So this is Karnali province and 3 areas there. If you know Nepal, you know. If you don't know Nepal, doesn't matter. So it's not only about us, people in need Nepal as an organization based in Czech Republic, but having the permanent presence in Nepal. It's about the partners, so we cooperate with the Mile West University of Nepal, with Durham University, UK, and tech company from Nepal. So there is as well link between the private sector and scientific institutions and NGOs. So what we are trying to do is to strengthen resilience of the local communities by better local governance. Half of our project, as it is pilot, is to test and develop the tool, but second half, similar important, is the research. We really have ambition to build up the case, to understand like what are the main obstacles of the local local communities related to the climate change. So not to talk about like big data and this 1 or 2 or 3 degrees, but to talk about concrete impact, which is felt by the concrete people living in the mountainous areas. And by this like a research part, we want to our ambition is to develop the case for not only Nepal but potential other countries facing the similar effects of the climate change. Obviously, I already mentioned like a human-centered design of the application of the like a final product. Obviously, we are building on like a citizen science, so we really want to understand like interlinks between climate change as such and life of every single ordinary person living in these areas. So probably this is the main slide to understand or to have an idea like what will be at the end. At the end will be model. This is this toy model. So like every local government on the district level and citizens with access to these governments should see what does it mean for them, what climate change means practically for them. What will be risk of the landslides? What will be risk of the roads being destroyed? What will be risk of the other climate effects, and what they can do in terms of better planning and better preparation. Yeah, I covered this at the beginning. and I talk about this one. So where we are piloting. We are now so far investing private money from Czech Republic, collected from like ordinary citizens living in Czech. And maybe for you, it's interesting to hear that we in Czech consider ourselves as somebody who is too far from the climate change, but now everybody sees that it's coming even to our country, and mobilization of the community in Europe is much more easier, and everybody understands that probably problems in Nepal or countries in Africa are much deeper than in problems we are already feeling in Czech Republic. So there is quite huge public support, so we can invest into the first phase, like a development of this program. But yeah, we are looking for the funding to build up this model, and these are these discussions about. My question is, where is it? Because to find the money for such project is super complicated. So if you have any funds in your pockets, just let me know, and we can discuss it later on. So thank you very much for the attention. I hope it was interesting. It was quick. Sorry for that. If you are interested to have more details, just I can give you the card and share with you a presentation, or contact you to my colleagues in Nepal. I was there a couple of years ago, so I'm not insider. Sorry for that. But my colleagues are working every day, and they operate. We as People in Need, we are kind of field-based organization, which means that we spend more time in the mountains than in the office in the capital. So my colleagues can share more and deeper knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne, for your presentation and your presence this morning. And I think because the theme of climate risks is something that EasyMode is also quite interested in, and some of our work also revolves around that. But I think we'd like to learn more about the TOE model that you are working on to help identify future climate impacts. So thank you for your presentation. So with those the scene set aside for us to take the conversation forward, I'd like to now call our youth from the region who would be sharing with us some of the experiences that they have encountered in their association with different events like this, organizations like EasyMode and all. But before that, I also wanted to acknowledge the presence of His Excellency Mr. Sushil Kumar Lamsal today here again with us, his ambassador of Nepal to Egypt. So I'm glad that you're able to join us today here as well. And we'd be hearing towards the end of the session some reflections from Mr. Lamsal based on the conversation that we'll have with the youth. So without further ado, may I invite Ms. Rubina Adhikari to the stage. Rubina comes from Nepal, and she's the thematic facilitator for mountain regions of the UN group, major group of children and youth. Welcome, Rubina. And may I also invite Ms. Warafta Mursid. She's from Bangladesh, but she's wearing two hats today because she's based in Bhutan. So she's been working and studying in Bhutan. And she is a founder of a very active organization called, which they name Gross International Nature. So I think, being from Bhutan, they are trying to adapt the philosophy of the gross national happiness that Bhutan is proposing, and would like to hear more about what her organization does later. Similarly, we have from India Miss Jacqueline Lippi. She comes from Assam, and she is the Asia Pacific regional focal point for the DRR working group, which is the UN major group for children and youth in India. So we have three young women youth from the region, but we also have a very young and dynamic women from USA, Miss Tyler Stotland. I'm very glad to invite you and join you as a panelist in our event. She's doing her Masters of Environmental Science in the Yale School of Environment, and I'm glad that you found of your interest to be engaged with EasyMode. So with these four dynamic young leaders, I'd like to run a very conversational sort of dialogue with all of you. And think it's better this way. Yeah. So I'll quickly introduce them once again. So Rubina Adhikari is a young forestry graduate working as a thematic facilitator for children and major group to unit. And she's also the country coordinator for Gross International Nature and a fellow of Climate Vulnerable Forum. She has been actively part of UN processes from UNIA to Stockholm Plus 50, where she ensures the voices of youth being documented and recognized. She also works in climate change education and adaptation in rural communities in the HKS region. Similarly, we have Warefta from Bangladesh, also from Bhutan. She's the founders. She's one of the founders of the Gross International Nature, and her interest lies around industrial toxicology, risk assessment, and natural resource management. She believes that in solving impacts of climate change, there is a need to promote transboundary cooperation and transboundary environmental solutions. So, we'd like to hear more from her about that aspect. And at Gross International Nature, they aim to work with youth in Bhutan, Bangladesh, and Nepal to promote adaptation, mitigation, and resilience through a bottom-up approach. So similarly, we have Jacqueline Lippi from India, Assam. She comes from the mountain region. She's a disaster management professional engaged in DRL policy making and a knowledge management officer with Children and Youth International at the UNDRR, same co-chair. She has worked as a consultant for several organizations on climate change DRR, including the UNDRR, UNICEF, ICAD. She holds a master's degree in disaster management from the Tata Institute of Social Science, India. Last but not the least, Tyler Stotland is a second year master student at the Yale School of Environment in the United States. She's writing a thesis on extreme heat adaptation in urban Nepal and is using both human subjects data and satellite data. She's also working at ASRI, which is the producer of the popular mapping tool ArcGIS, and is the world's leading location intelligence company. So now I'll just dive into some of the questions that I have, set for you. Now, maybe I'll start from Rubina because I made it first. If you could hold. So Rubina, being a young sort of climate activist coming from Nepal, if you could tell us, why does climate action matter to you, right? And why were you interested to be a part of this process where you got to engage with organizations like Easy Mode, that is mostly working towards the promotion of mountain agenda. So what made you interested to be linked with us? If you could share some reflections.
So, hello. Hello.
Can you make the volume a little high? I think we have a competition with this Chilean group, so it's been a little challenging.
Hello. Can you hear me? Oh, I can't hear my voice. So, hi everyone. Welcome here again, and thank you, Dainda, for the introduction. So, to answer your question, as we're already facing the triple planetary crisis, I think that everyone should be bothered by climate change, and everybody should be doing for something for climate change, although they don't come from the same background. So, I'd like to share my story of how I started. A couple of years ago, I came across with an organization which wanted me to do a presentation to spread awareness regarding the Arctic Ocean. So I asked them, like, why should I be bothered about Arctic Ocean? We are a landlocked country. So they said that although Arctic Ocean is melting, which is thousands of miles far, it is still impacting the nations like Nepal, which is a landlocked country. So that fascinated me, also intrigued me of how or what's happening or what I can do about it. So just imagine the ocean that is thousands of miles far from us, it's still impacting us by melting the ice. So our Himalayas with just hundred of miles far. So what it is doing to us. So I did some of my research. So that's how I started. And at this point, there's no looking back. And I got into some of the constituencies through which I could raise my voice. And for the past 2 years, I have been raising my voice for the climate actions. And I hope we all are here doing following the same journeys. And that's how I got started. And that's how I look forward to it as well. So
Thank you, thank you, Rubina, and glad that you've decided to become a part of this journey along with Isimo in raising more climate action in the region. So maybe if you can pass the microphone to Warefta, why don't you also share some of the some of the reasons why you decided to work in this area and why you decided to work with EasyMode.
Thank you very much for the question. Uh, so I started studying in Bhutan in the year 2015. I was in Bangladesh and I was intrigued and I was amazed amazed with the transition, the way Bangladesh is running and the way Bhutan is running its country. And what intrigued me is if GLOF happens, Glacier Lake outburst flood happens, then what will happen to Bangladesh? We won't be there. So that's where our journey started of Gross International Nature. And I started thinking about how to make it transboundary, because if air pollution is transboundary, if the problem is transboundary, the solution needs to be transboundary as well. So that's how I started communicating with people from Bangladesh, Nepal, and Bhutan, because I thought these are the three countries with whom I can reach out at the earliest. And that's how we started our journey. And now why AC mode? I think we are a young version of AC mode right now. With the experience and collaboration that AC mode has been providing us, the knowledge that they are providing us with, I think we want to follow that footsteps. And with their 40 years, or for next year, it's going to be 40th year. So with 40 years of experience and young youth experience, experienced people like us, not experienced, but advocates like us, would strengthen the combination of the work. And I believe we can implement more projects in it, in this transboundary environmental solution region. So that's how it started.
Thank you, Arafat. Thank you very much, and thank you also for reminding EasyMode that it's getting older. But I think for the fact that we've started engaging with youth, young activists like all of you, is also the reflection of our mission towards being more inclusive in our new strategy that will be starting from next year. So now I move on to Jacqueline. You come from Assam, and I think the interest area of your the subject is disaster, and you've been engaged in the different forums around disaster for quite some time. And from yesterday's and today's event also, I think there was a lot of discussion around the need for more concrete solutions to to control the impacts of disaster. So would you like to share some of the reflections from your side as to why climate action and why mountain agenda?
Thank you so much for the question. I think the environment that we're sitting in right now, with so many sessions around and so many noise, that itself says that the youth has to be loud. So yeah, I will be bit loud, bringing out my youth voice around. Um, so why first is about the climate action and disaster risk reduction, because of the holistic problems that we all face. I really appreciate that you mentioned Assam, because we know that how Assam is connected so much with Bhutan, also with Nepal, sharing the same river, sharing the same ecosystem. And once it floods in Bhutan, it's gonna have a huge impact on Nepal and Assam and Bangladesh. So that's how we are integrated. And my colleague mentioned about the transboundary issues. So that brings that we built our strength together with the younger version of EasyMode for cooperation and collaboration. Second is, we are very much connected in terms of culture and livelihood. So, climate action and disaster risk reduction is very, very much important that we work together. Lastly, about the disaster risk reduction. So, we all know how vulnerable the Hindu Kush Himalayan region is. So, with more working on the holistic early warning would be very much important, and I would like to highlight that we can work together on that, But when I say early warnings, it shouldn't be the scientific ones, because I am not sure if children and youth who are on the ground would understand. So those messages have to be children and youth friendly. And I think second question was the why engaged with the easy mode. I really, really want to appreciate and give a applaud that the support the director sir of easy mode and everyone in the easy mode has been provided with bringing the more youth voices to the mountains. However, I would also like to highlight, why not add children and youth voices from the mountains? So I would stop here and hand it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacqueline, and thank you also for again highlighting the importance of understanding the transboundary climate risks, because we all are connected. And I think my senior colleague, Dr. Arun Shrestha, would be very happy to hear that those kind of realization and the understanding are there in the minds of the youth as well. So thank you very much for that. So now going to the other part of the world. So we have Tyler joining in from the States. But the reason she's here is because she's very interested in this part of the world, and I think the topic of your research is also centered around Nepal, right? So if you'd like to comment on the similar questions that I'd asked my fellow youth leaders, Tyler.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. I'll start with why climate action. I think that's a really important question. We're all obviously here to address climate change, and I think it's incredibly valuable to think about what is our why, what is our personal mission statement for taking action on climate change. And for me, I would say that it started from growing up in a heavily forested rural area and really feeling connected to those forests and that natural environment. And I think it was that sense of place and that sense of connectedness to my community, and seeing that the community was intertwined with human and nature. And that's the reason I felt like I wanted to protect it. That's the reason that I started working on climate change. And I think that now, as an adult, or a young adult, I think that it's not just about protecting nature and protecting this place, the places in the world that I care about, but it's more broadly the notion that when I do get older, and if I have a family, and the next generations that I'll support, I want them to experience the same beautiful nature that I had the privilege of experiencing. And I want them to feel the same sense of place and sense of interconnectedness between human and natural societies. And I think that we have to fight climate change and fight these horrible environmental problems that we're facing today in order to give the next generation those opportunities. And then in terms of Istimad and why I'm interested in mountain issues, my thesis has been focused on understanding opportunities for climate change adaptation, particularly adaptation to extreme heat in urban areas of Nepal. And my interest in general is urbanization and climate change. And I think that when I had the opportunity to travel to urban Nepal this past summer and talk to people, it was really clear that many people are reliant on the mountains for climate change adaptation, which is ironic because, as we've all discussed so far in this Cryosphere Pavilion, the mountains are themselves really vulnerable to climate change. And so that's not necessarily the best option to rely upon. You can't necessarily escape to the mountains, for example, to have a cooler climate than some of the Terai regions in Nepal. We don't know that the mountains are going to be stable unless we protect them from climate change. And so I think I'm here to learn more about and hopefully speak about the relationship between urban areas and the rural mountain areas in Nepal, and think about what are these relationships.
Thank you, Tyler. And I think with that, I'll move into sort of new set of questions. Now that we've established that there is a need for youth engagement for climate action, right? My next question would be, maybe I can start from the other end now. Maybe if Tyler, you could start responding. So, as based on your experience so far and your engagement with other organizations or other platforms, do you think we have enough, or do you think we have adequate platforms for youths like you to be engaged for promoting climate action, but not just climate action, but climate action for mountains. So, do you think are there enough platforms? Do you see around the world? If not, what would be your proposal?
Yeah, I think the short answer is no. There's not enough platforms at all, especially when it comes to mountains. And I think that social media has been a really powerful tool so far to connect people across the world. But I think there need to be more forums, particularly online. I think that's one silver lining of the pandemic is that we've all become more used to virtual connection. I think we can really capitalize on that to increase youth engagement and connection across the world. And I think when it comes to mountains, there needs to be new forums for that specifically, whether it be a new subset of social media, whether it be maybe an online forum within ISIMOD, like an ISIMOD website. I'm not an expert on the approach necessarily, but I think it'd be really valuable to have more ways to engage with mountains and educate people about mountains, not just in Hindu Kush Himalaya, but the mountains where they are and how can they take climate action, for their mountains as well. And the last thing I would add is I think that it would be really helpful to engage youth in mountain issues, particularly from a geospatial perspective. So how can we use mapping and satellites and questions starting with where are the mountains that we need to protect, and where are the people going to be impacted by climate change? I think if we can use a geographic lens, that will be a really powerful tool to manage the problems that we face.
Thank you, Tyler. I very much like the emphasis that you put on the where. I think that's the location is really, really important, in whatever context we're talking about, may it be disaster, may it be resources, may it be migration. So that aspect is quite interesting, and thank you for setting that. So maybe can we hear from Jacqueline, because I think based on your experience so far, I think you'd have a lot to offer, and then propose to ISIMOD.
Thank you for the question. With the platform specifically to children and youth, we have UNFCCC Youngo, but sadly, we don't have very specific children and youth voices from the mountains. I would request, as we have the colleague from Youngo, so we can have a very specific children and youth group based on mountains. I believe we might argue that we have Youngo members or COI members from Nepal, Bangladesh. However, I would request that each altitude in the mountains, the geography, the problems changes. So I think we can have a very specific working group on mountains. That is one. Second is we have the Sendai Stakeholder Engagement Mechanism Forum, which is under the UNDRR, which is a platform to engage all the stakeholders for the implementation of the Sendai framework. Unfortunately, again, we don't have a specific platform to bring the voices of mountains. So what I would propose is that we could have a very specific technical working group on Sendai stakeholder engagement mechanism, so that we not only push for the climate action, but we also push for disaster risk reduction in the mountains. So yeah, I'll stop here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jacqueline. I think those are very, very good, two constructive sort of pointers that you have indicated, and the fact that we've now started sort of linkages with the Youngo representative is already a start, and would like to take the communication forward in the coming days as well. Thank you, Jacqueline. So, Warefta, now if you could share some of the reflections and the ideas that you can bring not only from Bangladesh but also from Bhutan in this question.
So first of all, about the adequacy of exposure for youth in mountains, I wouldn't say we don't have, we have, but the thing what we don't have is knowledge. There is an intensive knowledge gap. There is a gap in capacity building. There is a gap in platforms like Ecopreneurs, where we have to think differently. We have to think how businesses can be sustainable in these mountains, how indigenous knowledge can come up to bottom-up approach level and can bridge into top-down approach. So GIN, Gross International Nature, it actually promotes to come up with, or it tries to bridge in top-down and bottom-up approach. So these are the things I believe we need to focus more on. And I want to highlight on Asia Pacific Youth Forum that ICIMOD had this activity last year. And we would request to come up with these kind of activities in upcoming years. And it's not for a year, maybe after 3 months or 4 months, because an activity, an action that takes, it's for 3 months, and after that, what happens to the rest of the 9 months? What to represent, what to do? We have to work on that. It's not only reporting. We have to constantly work in three quarterly basis. So these are the things that I would like to highlight from both Bangladesh and Bhutan.
Right. Thank you, Warefta. I think those are very important points, and thank you also for reminding about the annual Asia Pacific Youth Forum, flagship event that we used to organize a few years ago. But I think it's time that we start thinking about restructuring it again, and then making it a sort of a consistent program and flagship event of ICIMOD, bringing youth from the region and beyond. And I also like the fact that you indicated the need for linking the knowledge gap between the youth and the experts and the policymakers and different stakeholders. So I think now I move to Rubina to hear some of the reflections on those questions.
So my answer to this question regarding the platform of youth in mountain region is yes and no, because I am the thematic facilitator of mountainous ecosystem from UNEP MGCY. But they had this thematic platform, I don't know why, last year. I'm not sure if they are having it again. But sadly, although I'm the one of the thematic facilitators, I don't have other constituencies having the same facilitator like Jacqueline mentioned. So I don't have other constituencies to collaborate. So hardly within this last 2 years, I hardly had maybe 1 or 2 sessions on mountain region. So that's how I got hold into ICIMOD as well. So ICIMOD has been extremely helpful in that matter. But I would like to push to have these constituencies, because I think Yongo or UNEP MGCY, or there is UNCCD Youth Caucus. So these are the constituencies that actually help youth to fit into negotiations process. So that's how you get youth to not only get into the part of activism, but also get inside the room of negotiations. So I push to have this thematic facilitating sessions or any sort of youth hub that push youth to be part of this mountainous ecosystem. Even we can start such session. It can be country specific. And other thing with HK's region is that since it shares the border of 8 countries, it's extremely important to have these constituencies or these youth hubs to be country specific, because we cannot have blanket approach for all the countries and do one activity and then implement it across all the region. So I push to have this, and I really look forward to ICIMOD to develop such platforms so that we can involve there and we can at least bring all the youth, at least from the 8 countries, bring together and raise our voices on this concern. So
thank you, Rubina. Warefta, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I wanted to add one thing, that is, whenever at policy level, we still follow westernized policies in Asia. We need policies and negotiations according to our own country specific, according to our own belt, this coastal region, this HKH region. And we need to work together. This is something that I really, really want to highlight here.
Thank you, Warefta, for highlighting that very important point that we all should remember. And thank you, Rubina, for sharing those observations and suggestions for ICIMOD to take it forward. And I think, like I said before, ICIMOD in its new strategy has sort of defined a particular outcome that is centered around creating a platform with for effective youth engagement in the coming years in different sectors. And I also like the idea of Rubina that we would have to be country specific at times, at the same time parallelly going regionally as well. So those are very important points. So now, for the last two questions, we discussed about the state that we are in, and the aspirations and the connections that the youth want to, improve on and develop further. Now, my last question is centered around, what next. So we talked about where, we talked about, the status. So my question would be, so I understand for all four of you, it's the first time that you're attending the UNFCCC COP event, right? So you've been here for last few days, and I think some of you, I think Jacqueline, you are here for the conference of the youth as well. So based on your experience so far, uh, what has been your sort of just two reflections out of your engagement in the last 2 days? You attended some of our technical sessions here at the Crasper Pavilion as well. What would be the two takeaway messages from here that you're taking back home, and what would be the two key messages that you would want to give to us, all of us, and organizations like EC Mode, that we should be taking note of those messages? So maybe I can start with Jacqueline.
Um, Thank you for the question. So the first part is about my experiences of COI and COP. So I feel very fortunate to have attend such a big platform. So quickly, 2 points on this is first is concern. The concern is that we do talk a lot about climate action, adaptation, and mitigation, but there are very, very, very minimum discussions connecting climate action and disaster risk reduction. Uh, so that is something is a concern, because we know we cannot differentiate climate actions and disaster risk reduction. Second point is that I'm scared actually. The why I'm scared is because I think the targets, the aims that we plan for 2030, I'm scared that we might not reach the way we are moving ahead. So that is something our concern, but without losing hope, I think we can definitely work more on it, as this time is very less for us. For the second part of the messages from youth, um, my first would be building the capacity of the children and youth, both on disaster risk reduction and climate action. Why? Because we tend to quote children and youth as a vulnerable group, but we are done with hearing it. We have the strength. So only thing we have to do is just put a bit of fire and we would grow by itself. So the capacity building is very much important. Another thing, which is again a scary thing, but I would like to highlight, is that the water issue on the Hindu Kush Himalayan region. We are so connected that if any stream goes dry in the upstream of the Himalayas, the downstream countries would be badly affected. So we are very, very connected on that, and we all know that water is life. So I would like to highlight that we work more on the water issues, so, and engaging more youth. So I would like to conclude that as glaciers are melting, but we, the children and youth, can't make our future melt like that. So thank you.
Thank you, Jacqueline. I think that is very, very well put, and I quite agree with you that time is of the essence, but at the same time, hope is what keeps us alive. So, with that message, I'd like to now request Warefta to share some of the reflections.
Um, I have a lot to say here, but I think I have to limit. First is we want to be in the negotiating body. That's very important. Second, youth are not activists only. I hate to say this, but I respect all profession, But with activism, we need knowledge. We need to build our capacity. I completely agree with Jacqueline. And about adaptation, mitigation, resilience, we need to know why it didn't work. For 30, 40 years, Bangladesh has been working, Bhutan has been working, Nepal has been working. But what's the challenge? Why are we still struggling, and why are we here? We should. I'm glad that COP is happening. COP27 is happening, but why? That's alarming. It would be great without COP solved everything. So we should. It's not interesting to come here and talk about this. That's alarming. We should be thinking about it. And the last two messages are: we need technical tools. We need to think about future. Maybe GIS tools give the youth or the adults by the age of 30, or the children, talk about GIS, how things are working. We need to bring technology and solutions together. And the second is abide our air, water, whatever problem we have, we need to have actions according to research and development, industrial ecology, and environmental education. These three pillars needs to be prominent in our Asian countries. That's it from my
Thank
side.
you. Thank you, Arifta. Very well put. I think, and thank you also for being very vocal about it. And I think, one message that you just shared about the need of having an increased understanding on the geospatial tools for the youth is something that, Tyler would really connect with. So maybe, may I request Tyler to share her experience, and then I move to Rubina.
Sure. Thank you. I was very excited that you mentioned GIS. I think in my mind, that's a huge part of not only a way to engage youth, but our climate solution in general. So I really appreciate the GIS shout out. So I think there's a couple things I want to say about this question. So before I get to the geospatial piece, another thing I wanted to mention is that I think it's very important looking forward to focus on urbanization. Already, the majority of our human population lives in cities and urban areas, and that majority is only going to grow going forward, particularly in Asian and African countries. And so in Hindu Kush Himalaya in particular, we need to think about how do we urbanize in a way that is strategic and sustainable. It can't be haphazard. It can't be, all impervious paved surfaces. We have to think about how can cities be dense, green, pedestrian friendly, and beautiful. That's important too. And we need to think about how will this urbanization connect with the mountains that we're also concerned about protecting? How do our different types of landscapes and climates connect with each other? And how can we capitalize on those connections? And then one way to educate people about all of that, as we just discussed, is GIS. And I just want to underscore the importance of geospatial technology. I think, as you mentioned, we need more technical tools, and we need youth engaging with the tools. For me, I hadn't even heard of GIS or geospatial anything until college. And I always thought of geography as just memorizing a map, basically. I didn't really think it was something that was engaging at all. And now I understand, and part of my work now with ESRI is trying to think about how do we engage people as young as kindergarten, first grade, second grade in geography, and make them understand that it's not just memorizing facts and memorizing a map, but it's thinking about where is climate change happening and how can we use geography as a problem-solving tool. And I think that that's incredibly powerful. And things like interactive maps can be a way to turn climate change into something fun. You can make it like a video game for kids. I developed a 3D map that is meant to mimic a video game, actually, so that kids can learn about urbanization. And it doesn't even feel like they're necessarily learning something. It feels like they're playing a game. And I think that that can be really useful. And it can be useful for analyzing the problems as well. And then I think in terms of takeaways from COP so far, one thing for me is optimism. I tend to feel, as others mentioned, very scared about climate change and honestly pessimistic sometimes. But I think that I've heard some pieces at COP so far that make me feel like, despite the fact that things are bleak in some areas right now, there's great windows for change. And that's something I want to communicate to lots of people, because I think hope is a big driver of action. And the last thing I would add is the power of conversation. I think that it's it's really exciting to be in person here with everybody and have conversations with other environmentalists from all over the world. And I think that we should capitalize on the power of human connection. And I think in my own research for my master's thesis, I was able to interview 150 people across the Terai region of Nepal. And I found that in that capacity too, having conversations with people is a really powerful tool to educate about climate change and take action. And it started with simple questions like, how often do you experience electricity outages in your home? And ended with, people telling me how they want to deal with climate change. So I think engaging with each other is something simple but really useful. And I hope that we can all continue to engage with each other here at COP. Thank you.
Thank you, Tyler. I think you've got some very interesting points. The first one is like they say, seeing is believing, right? So giving people access, of those tools and technologies, the GIS special tools, for them to actually see from their eyes, what's happening. I think that's a very, very powerful medium. And I also like the need for hope and the optimism, that you sort of, as young, we all need to sort of generate in ourselves, and the power of conversation. I think that's really, really important point. And that is what actually we want to achieve out of the conversation that we have right now. So thank you for that. Now to close the set of questions for this session, I'd like to request Rubina to share some of her reflections.
So I couldn't not agree with my colleagues here, and adding to what Jacqueline just said, that we're not even halfway through our SDG goals. So it's really scary. So for me, the biggest challenge is what will happen after we go back from here. Because until and unless we're here, it looks very promising. It feels like we're solving the climate change today. It feels like we're doing it right now, standing here, staying here, and talking about it. But I'm afraid what will happen after 18th of November? Will we still talk about climate change? Will we start the process of next COP28, or we will just forget about it until few months ahead of COP28? Because that's what we have been seeing. So I think the real challenge is to continue the process, is to continue what we have been doing, not for this 2 weeks, but to continue throughout the year, so that we are prepared for the next COP28. We're prepared for the next COP28 that's happening in Dubai. And I believe that, I think it's the problem of so many countries, including Nepal as well, that we just start the process preparation on only few months back. And oftentimes the whole process, oftentimes it tackles into the political football again. So it's a reminder to just differentiate these two aspects and make it a common goal of solving the climate change, and not tackling this or not making it into a political feudal, or not taking it into another direction. Also, the another challenge that I see is the faces of the representative of climate change. So what I see is that we have a lot of new faces every year in COP or in many of the processes. But what is important is that one people or the group of people should be there in the same COP every year, following the same process. Because also that is also the gap that we have been facing, because we need the same faces every year that is following the process, so that we don't have the gap. If there is one group of people attending this COP27 and another group of people attending another COP28 from the same country, then that won't make any sense. We need the same group of people, we need the same group of effort that has been put every year. So I think from our side, from the youth side, is to continue what we are doing, is to advocate and follow the negotiation process, so that we are not taken away, we are not tokenized again, and we're not just tagged along, that we youths only shout and they only just do the activism and not the negotiation part. So it's a reminder to all the youths that we have to be in that room, and I'm very glad for this party badge that I got. So it's a reminder that everybody should try to get one and get into the negotiation process. I know it's very, very hard to get one. It's a challenge, but we all need to overcome that. So that's my takeaway from this talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Rubina. I'll get back to you, Warefta, in a second. But I just wanted to acknowledge the sort of the other aspect of the need for proper planning, management, that you just identified, apart from the talks about the youth engagement or the technical issues on the climate action. and the continuation, giving continuation to the momentum, that has been started, and starting the planning process way ahead in advance. I think those are good principles that we all need to follow. So I hope we'll be able to do that starting next year. But before closing, what if did you had something to add?
I have one statement that is, I would really like to highlight on anticipatory funding, which is not still prominent, or it's still a new term, which is we know when the cyclones are coming, we know when the impacts are coming up every year. So if we can get the funding beforehand to create some resilience, that would be great. And rather than coming with new terminologies every year, like climate refugees, climate adaptation, mitigation, we solve the problems again and again, which and find the gaps. These are the two things I would.
Thank you,
want to highlight.
Warefta. I think that's also another important point. The issue of the finance, the investment, the resource, right, to get things done. So with this, I think we've now come to the conclusion of this moderated session. But before we close the event, I'm very glad that His Excellency Mr. Susil Lonsal is here with us. He was here in our event yesterday as well, and it was very, very nice to hear from him. Sharing the experiences of the decade-long sort of in the diplomatic sort of practices that he's engaged with. And my last speaker, Rubina, actually sort of already wanted to connect her discussion around the need for providing space for youth, not only in the some sort of dialogue and conversation, but also in the sort of making them skilled enough to go and negotiate in the relevant arena. So with great honor, I would like to request Excellency Ambassador to come and join our youth in the panel and provide us few reflections from your end.
Udayanji, thank you so much for having me at this conversation with youth. And I learned a lot. I will tell you what. First, and then these are quotations from all these wonderful, brilliant minds. And it's not in an orderly fashion. I just jotted down what struck me. They are conversation, simple, but they are useful. Not just activism, but negotiations. Put a little fire and it will light up. We can't let our futures melt. I mean, these are pearls of wisdom. And actually, this also indicates the fire that lights within the souls of the youth. Many developing countries, Nepal being one, they have what we call a demographic dividend. A huge majority of the population is under 25. But this dividend, the demographic dividend, is not going to last long. And that is our greatest concern. The window of opportunity is getting restricted every year, and we have to be able to make the best utilization of the youth potential that we have. And it's nice that the youth are ready. It's very encouraging that the youth is trying to play the role that it deserves. And couple of common ideas that we all agree, I mean, across continents, countries, cultures, civilizations, societies. And all of you made some very promising suggestions. And they are the interconnectedness of our common existence. Most of our problems are transboundary problems. They cut across cultures, civilizations, cut across societies, languages, linguistic groups, racial and ethnic communities, and so on. So if the problems are transboundary and if they cut across different identities, the solutions that we are seeking for should also be in a comprehensive manner, which means there is a greater need for dialogues like this, in which youth from across different societies, communities come together and come to a conclusion on what should be the next steps. And what should be the next steps? I think the youth are very clear on what the next steps are. The next steps are to let the youth decide, because the future belongs to the youth, and they are the most deserving constituencies of society, of deciding what the future looks like, because it belongs to you. It belongs to the youth. Abraham from Ghana, thank you very much for pointing out that we are going to take control and we are not letting others decide what is good for us. That is the fire that will change the world. Thank you very much for pointing that out. Ian, climate change toy model, we heard from it. We don't have him now, but we heard from him about the toy model, about his experience researching in Karnali zone. I hope such experiences can be scaled up and replicated to make bigger changes in society, because the small scale replica models also contain within the multitudes, and they reflect the basic ingredients of what happens in a larger map. Rubina, yes, the Arctic Ocean is related. You know, the butterfly model. Even the flutter of a butterfly's wings are going to have far-reaching consequences. And the Arctic is much bigger than a butterfly. Of course, what happens in the Arctic is going to have a big impact on what happens in the Himalayas, the Hindu Kush Himalayas. So we are all one interconnected reality and existence. So the youth, for the youth to be able to understand these basic, fundamental, existential ideas is very heartwarming. Because you know what? The youth is facing another crisis. The crisis of indoctrination, of polarization, of fundamentalism, and of sticking to ideas that have long past their relevance and use. To hear that you understand that the future is not with ideas which have expired, but with science is very, very pleasing, very encouraging. Warefta, you also pointed out how governance is important in changing society, in managing society. Two similar countries, two different governance systems. But I have been in Bangladesh, and I can assure you that Bangladesh is making great progress. And it's a matter of great pride that the social indicators in Bangladesh are very progressive. And I'm sure that it will continue to improve in the future, right? Jacqueline, yes. These are holistic problems and they demand a common solution. A solution in Assam is not going to solve the problem in another state or another country. So the countries should come together and find for themselves a solution that works for all. And early warning systems are part of that solution, as you pointed out. And disaster risk reduction, something which has not been discussed so much, should be in the priority list of climate action, because these two are interrelated. As Tyler pointed out, you pointed out that the mountains themselves are vulnerable. How long are they going to vet for the urban spaces? The urban spaces will be able to benefit from the cushion that the mountains provide only for so long. But then, being vulnerable, they will have to be catered to, which means there is an interconnected space between the mountains and the urban spaces, which has to be recognized first. So, the idea of this discussion is that there should be a recognition of the commonness of our problem, of the future that belongs to us all, in a way in which science is at the center and the youth are the drivers. Science at the center, youth as the drivers, and governance as the model, with a future that is one. This is the discussion that I heard. Did I hear it correctly? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, His Excellency. I think you've summarized the whole discussion very succinctly, and I couldn't have done any better job than what you just did. And it's always a pleasure to hear from you, sir. Thank you for being with us. But just before we conclude the session, and I would like to request panelists and His Excellency to stay where you are for now, because I'd like to invite Dr. Babar Khan from EasyMode, who is the Senior Ecosystem Management Specialist, to provide a sort of a closing note to the event and also give a vote of thanks. Dr. Babar.
Thank you so much, Udayan. I don't think that I can say anything in addition to what His Excellency has already covered very beautifully and comprehensively. So, with a great thanks to you, sir, and the panelists. I wish to say just two things. One is the time. Another is the point, place. In terms of time, our generation, your generation, if we think about, is at the cusp of change. Is really at the cusp of change. This generation, in terms of knowledge and access to information, is the one unprecedented access, having unprecedented access to information and knowledge because of digitization, social media, and all this happening all around us. This was never possible. This was never seen before in the past. The second is such glowing minds, educated, informed, aware. But the problem is they are very little in number. Now, it's the youth that have to reach out to the larger population of the youth to become a moment from a force. This is the beginning, but we have to generate the waves, and to generate the waves, you need energy. Energy is there in the rural and urban settings where many youth are sitting around you. They will then listen to you, they will join you, and then you can become a movement actually. So we need a moment to create the web, to actually influence the decision makers, policy makers at the global forums here. So you could get into the room where negotiations are taking place this time. The third thing is climate change. Our ancestors have never heard of climate change. Neither they know about it, I believe. But your generation is going to face it. Yours is the generation that has to bear the burden of climate change. On one hand, one of the youth panelists very rightly mentioned the triple planetary crisis. It's the biodiversity loss, the environmental pollution, and the disasters. These are going to be the top priority crises and topics of discussion for your generation to consider. And my submission, just as a conclusion, would be to equip yourself better as you can do, so you could cope with the challenges of the future. You are the future leaders and wish you to be, and we really wish you to be informed leaders to make informed decisions. So we could manage the emerging and existing risks, planetary crisis, stated with planetary crisis that we are facing, you are facing, and your generations have to face. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. Thank you, participants, for participating in this wonderful discussion. Have a good time. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Baba, for sharing your sort of closing reflections. And thank you all for joining the event. But before we give this space for another event that's happening, I think we did quite good with the time as well. So we still have time for one more thing, and which is the most important thing is taking a group photo. So may I request Isimoto colleagues to also join our respected colleagues here, youth leaders. Abraham, yeah, you should also be in the group photo. So yeah.
Good.